The 2026 Australian Open women's draw has dropped, and it looks pretty solid for the first and second seeds, Aryna Sabalenka and Coco Gauff, while not so great for defending champion Madison Keys and career slam chaser Iga Świątek.
The Australian Open draw just dropped. Coco Gauff and Aryna Sabalenka are on a collision course for what could be the match of the tournament. Gauff's coming off 4 straight wins over Iga Świątek. Sabalenka's the 2-time defending champion. Their paths through the draw look clear. The projected quarterfinal matchup has the entire WTA holding its breath. This could define the 2026 season. Who wins if Gauff and Sabalenka meet in Melbourne? The hot hand or the defending champ? Drop your prediction below. The 2026 Australian Open women's draw has been released, and the projected quarterfinals look absolutely stacked. Aryna Sabalenka versus Jasmine Paolini. Coco Gauff versus Mira Andreeva. Jessica Pegula versus Amanda Anisimova, and Iga Świątek versus Elena Rybakina. But the matchup everyone's talking about, the one that could potentially happen if both players navigate their sections, is Coco Gauff versus Aryna Sabalenka in what would be an absolute blockbuster quarterfinal.
Start with Sabalenka. She'll take on the wild card Rajona in the first round. Winner of that will take on either Pavlyuchenkova or a qualifier in the second round. Then you get Lemens taking on Potapova. Winner of that will take on Świątek versus the 28th seed Raducanu in that second round. Then you got Mboka, the 17th seed, taking on Jones. Winner of that will take on either McNally or a qualifier in the second round. Then you got Kudermetova taking on another qualifier. Winner of that will take on either Gelfi or the number 14 seed Towson in the second round. So, not easy for Sabalenka.
Let's start with Sabalenka's section because she's the 2-time defending champion and the top seed. Her opening round opponent is Zeynep Sonmez, a 20-year-old French lefty who won her first title in São Paulo late last season. Recently, Sonmez lost in the opening round of Hobart qualifying, so the form isn't exactly intimidating. Sabalenka should cruise through that match without breaking a sweat. The second round could bring Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, who pushed Sabalenka to 3 tight sets at last year's Australian Open quarterfinals. But Pavlyuchenkova is 34 years old now and hasn't won a match since last year's US Open. The form just isn't there. Emma Raducanu is the projected third-round opponent, and while Emma has pushed Sabalenka in the past, particularly at Wimbledon and Cincinnati where she took her to 7-6 in the third set, Emma's a complete question mark health-wise. That right foot issue keeps popping up, and she just lost to world number 204 Taylor Preston in Hobart. Not exactly inspiring confidence.
Gotta watch out for Sabalenka. She lost in the final very closely last year, won the 2 previous Australian Opens before that, so she is on a roll and she's probably the best Australian Open player, not just the best player in the world in this tournament.
Sabalenka should reach the second week without dropping a set. The round of 16 is where things get interesting. She's likely to face either Victoria Azarenka or Clara Towson. Towson pushed Sabalenka to 2 tight sets at last year's Australian Open and beat her in Dubai. But Towson's confidence is shot right now. She's on a 4-match losing streak and retired from her Adelaide opener with an injury. Azarenka seems like the more likely opponent, and she's playing well, having just beaten defending champion Madison Keys in Adelaide. The problem is Azarenka's health. Her right knee is strapped. She played 3 tough 3-setters in Adelaide, and by the time she potentially faces Sabalenka in the round of 16, she might not have much left in the tank physically. So Sabalenka making the quarterfinals seems like a safe bet. She's the 2-time defending champion. She knows how to win in Melbourne. The conditions suit her game perfectly. The faster courts allow her to dictate with her power, and her draw, while not completely free of danger, doesn't present any matchups that should realistically trouble her before the final 8.
Next part of the draw now, we've got the number 3 seed Gauff taking on Rakhimova in the first round. Winner of that match will take on either Danilovic or Venus Williams in the second round. So Gauff versus Williams potentially in that second round. Then you've got another qualifier taking on Minero. Winner of that will take on either Baptiste or the number 32 seed Vondroušová in the second round. Then you've got the 19th seed Mukovic taking on Christian. Winner of that will take on either Parks or Ayala in the second round. Then you got Lee versus Osorio. Winner of that will take on either Lynette or the 15th seed Navarro in the second round. So, very fun second round potentially for a bunch of these players. You know, the seeds are going to have to really work for it in this section. Of course, you've got to watch out for Coco Gauff. Did win the French Open last year, has made a semi-final here before, so shouldn't be overlooked as a potential champion of Australia in the future.
Now let's talk about Coco Gauff's section, which is arguably even more favorable. Gauff opens against Sofia Kenin, which could be tricky given Kenin's history as a former Australian Open champion, but Kenin's form has been inconsistent lately. The second round could bring Venus Williams, which would be an emotional matchup, but not a particularly dangerous one given Venus is 45 years old and playing more for the love of the game than serious championship contention at this point. Still, Venus making history as the oldest woman to play a singles main draw match in Melbourne is something special. The third round is where Gauff could face Marketa Vondrousova, the former Wimbledon champion. But Gauff has a 3-0 head-to-head record against Vondrousova and has never lost a set to her. Vondrousova is also coming off an injury withdrawal in Adelaide, so her health is questionable. Gauff could also potentially face Jessica Bouzas Monero in the third round, which would be a revenge match after Bouzas Monero beat her at the United Cup in that bizarre 6-1, 6-7, 6-0 scoreline. But nobody seriously believes Bouzas Monero beats Gauff twice in 1 month. That United Cup loss was an aberration, a weird match where nothing went right for Gauff from the start. The round of 16 is where Gauff's draw gets more interesting. She's projected to face either Emma Navarro or Karolina Muchova. Navarro has beaten Gauff twice in majors, both times in 2024. That's a matchup Gauff would probably prefer to avoid because those losses are still relatively fresh in her mind. But Navarro's form has been mediocre lately, and she could have a tricky opener against Magdalena Fresh. Muchova, on the other hand, looked fantastic in Brisbane, where she made the semifinals and snapped Alina Avanesian's 13-match win streak. Gauff is 4-0 against Muchova and has never lost a set to her, so if Gauff enjoys the matchup against you, it's almost impossible to beat her. She just has that mental edge going in. When Gauff knows she owns a matchup, she plays with freedom and confidence that's hard to match. The most likely scenario is Gauff cruising through to the quarterfinals for the third straight year in Melbourne. And if both Gauff and Sabalenka win their respective sections, we get the dream matchup in the quarters. Now here's why this matchup is so compelling. Gauff is coming off the best tennis of her life. She just beat Iga Świątek 4 times in a row, all in straight sets. That's unprecedented. Nobody in tennis history has done that to Świątek before. Gauff also became world #1 in doubles while maintaining her status as a top singles player. She's playing with supreme confidence right now. Her serve is clicking. Her forehand, which used to be a liability, is now a genuine weapon. And most importantly, she believes she can beat anyone. Sabalenka, meanwhile, is the ultimate champion. She's won back-to-back Australian Open titles. She knows how to perform in Melbourne. She thrives under pressure, and she's one of the most powerful players in the history of women's tennis. When Sabalenka is on, she's basically unbeatable. She overpowers opponents with her serve and ground strokes, and her mental game has improved dramatically over the past 2 years. The screaming and intensity that used to work against her early in her career has now become a strength. She channels that emotion into positive energy rather than letting it derail her. The head-to-head between Gauff and Sabalenka is relatively even, with Sabalenka holding a slight edge. But their most recent matches have been competitive. Gauff knows she can compete with Sabalenka. She's pushed her in multiple encounters. And now that Gauff is playing the best tennis of her career, she'd enter this matchup believing she can win. That belief matters more than people realize. Tennis at the highest level is as much mental as it is physical. The tactical matchup is fascinating. Sabalenka relies on power and aggression. She wants to dictate points, hit through opponents, and end rallies quickly. Her game plan is simple but devastatingly effective. Serve big, hit big, and don't give opponents time to settle into rhythm. Gauff's biggest strength is her court coverage and defensive ability. She's one of the best athletes in women's tennis. She can track down shots that should be winners and turn defense into offense. Against Sabalenka's power, Gauff's court coverage becomes even more valuable because Sabalenka will hit shots that look like clean winners, only to see Gauff somehow get them back with interest. The serving battle would be crucial. Sabalenka has one of the biggest serves in the women's game. When she's serving well, she's almost impossible to break. Gauff's serve has improved dramatically, but it's still not on Sabalenka's level in terms of raw power. However, Gauff's serve has become much more reliable and consistent. She's reduced her double fault significantly and is placing her serves better. More importantly, Gauff's return game is elite. She's one of the best returners on tour, which could neutralize some of Sabalenka's serving advantage. If Gauff can consistently get Sabalenka's serves back in play and force longer rallies, that plays directly into her strengths. The mental side of this matchup is equally intriguing. Gauff has momentum right now. She's riding high after her United Cup performance and her recent dominance over Świątek. Confidence is sky high. When you're on that kind of run, you walk onto the court expecting to win. You see opportunities instead of threats. Sabalenka, however, has championship pedigree. She knows what it takes to win in Melbourne. She's been in pressure situations before and delivered. That experience could be the difference in a tight match where 1 or 2 points decide sets. The crowd would likely favor Gauff, especially if the match happens in a night session. Gauff is incredibly popular with younger fans. She's charismatic, relatable, and represents the future of American tennis. She's also been outspoken on social issues, which resonates with many fans. Sabalenka would embrace the villain role, feeding off the crowd's energy in her own way. She's proven she can win in hostile environments before. In fact, some players perform better when the crowd is against them because it simplifies the mental game. There's no pressure to please anyone. You're just focused on beating your opponent. One factor that could influence this matchup is fatigue and schedule. Sabalenka should have an easier path to the quarterfinals, which means she'd be fresher. Gauff might have to grind through a few tougher matches depending on how the draw plays out. If Gauff has played 3-set marathons in the earlier rounds while Sabalenka has cruised through in straight sets, that physical toll could matter in a quarterfinal. 3-set matches in Australian heat and humidity take a serious toll on your body. Recovery between matches becomes crucial. The other projected quarterfinals also matter because they affect the overall tournament context. If Iga Świątek makes it to her projected quarterfinal, she'd face Aryna Sabalenka, which is a brutal matchup for Świątek given their history and Rybakina's power game. Rybakina's serve and flat ground strokes cause Świątek all kinds of problems. If Świątek loses that match, it opens up the bottom half of the draw significantly. Jessica Pegula versus Amanda Anisimova would be an All-American quarterfinal that could produce an unexpected semifinalist. But the Gauff-Sabalenka matchup is the one everyone wants to see. It represents the present and future of women's tennis. Sabalenka is at the peak of her powers, a dominant champion with multiple Grand Slam titles and a legitimate claim to being the best player in the world right now. Gauff is the rising star who's figured out how to beat the best players consistently. This would be a passing of the torch moment if Gauff wins, or a statement of continued dominance if Sabalenka prevails. The stakes are enormous. For Sabalenka, a win would keep her three-peat hopes alive and cement her status as one of the great Australian Open champions. Only a handful of players in the Open era have won 3 consecutive Australian Open titles. That's rarefied air. For Gauff, a win would prove she's not just hot right now, but genuinely capable of beating the absolute best players when it matters most at Grand Slams. It would validate everything she's been working toward. The pressure would be intense. Quarterfinals at a Grand Slam are when things get real. The crowds are bigger, the expectations are higher. Every point feels magnified. Both players have experience in these moments, but Gauff's relative youth compared to Sabalenka's championship pedigree creates an interesting dynamic. Gauff is only 21 years old. She's already won a Grand Slam, but she's still developing and improving. Sabalenka is in her prime at 27, with the experience and mental toughness that comes from winning multiple majors. If this match happens and both players are healthy and in form, it could legitimately be the match of the tournament. It might even surpass the final in terms of quality and drama. Sometimes the best matches don't happen in finals. Sometimes they happen in quarters or semis, when 2 players at the absolute peak of their powers collide before one of them is supposed to according to the draw. The winner of Gauff-Sabalenka, if it happens, would likely be the favorite to win the entire tournament. Beating either of those 2 players in peak form is incredibly difficult. The path from the quarterfinals to the title would still require 2 more wins, but psychologically, getting past your biggest threat can provide momentum that carries through the rest of the tournament. Coco Gauff versus Aryna Sabalenka in the Australian Open quarterfinals would be absolute must-watch tennis. The hot hand against the defending champion, the future against the present. If you think Gauff continues her dominance, hit that like button. If you believe Sabalenka's experience and power prevail, smash subscribe. Either way, Melbourne is about to deliver some incredible tennis.